new opportunity, particularly with people under the age of 30.
Yeah, you got timer. So it's...
One of my students, wonderful guy, he's got the hand of God on his life. After finishing most of his theological education and having done youth ministry for several years, he decided that he was going to get involved in starting ministries and starting a church on the island of Montreal. And Christian Direction worked closely with him to define the catch basin and what he was going to do. I'm going to make a comment about church planting in just a minute. I think there's deep reasons to question both what we're doing and how we're doing church planting in Quebec. But David got it right. He convinced his church that if they were going to start a new church, they were going to do it completely different. And the church made a commitment, and they sent 250 of their people to get involved. They were almost all of them were under the age of 30. And in the course of the last year, they now have 3 services on Sunday morning. They meet in a high school auditorium, and they're now on to about 600 people. It's a movement of God's Spirit. Really, we understand. Now, raises a problem. People under the age of 30 who have no church or religious background don't know anything about this thing called tithing or giving. Okay? So he's going to face a financial crisis pretty soon. But he'll figure it out because God's got his hand on his life. So I'm upbeat because I think that there's a new movement of God's Spirit amongst young people. Many of you know that I'm actively involved with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship and the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students. The movement at McGill University in English has never been greater in the last 50 years. God's at work amongst young people in a fascinating way. I'm upbeat. I'm seeing new initiatives taking place in church planting. Now, old traditional ways of church planting have been frightful. A failure. The amount of money that's been invested over the last 30 years in church planting has not delivered the goods. It's basically overpromised, underdelivered. But what's interesting is that younger church planters are really getting brave. They're getting creative. And they're doing it bivocationally. And there's better things happening right now, quite frankly, on the English side and in the cultural communities than on the French side. But I think there's a new day coming. And so there are new opportunities that I certainly haven't seen in the 35 years that I've been involved in public ministry in Quebec. A third thing that really encourages me is how congregations are using the arts. Now, that should come as no surprise for those of you who know anything about Quebec, because of how important cinema, jazz, symphonies, sculpturing, the visual arts is in our culture. But for far too long, particularly on the Protestant and evangelical side, we've tended to be anti-cultural. So as I like to say, most of our church buildings, they kind of accentuate the ugly. But those days are changing, and we're seeing a new engagement in using the arts. I don't like that expression. I should have said that. You don't use the arts. But you integrate the arts into how the people of God engage culture. And so the way that is being done in a way that brings honor and glory to God the Creator, but it's reconnecting with the culture. One of my colleagues, he's the artist in residence at Christian Direction. Bernard is both an artist, he's both a painter and a musician. 2 days a week, 3 days a week now, he works with street people. And we do a partnership agreement with a drop-in center in the city. He teaches street guys how to paint. We don't call it art therapy, but it's like art therapy. But then what he does is 6 times a year he organizes art expos for street guys. And they sell their art. The proceeds, they learn how to get off the street. how to become autonomous in their living arrangements. It becomes an incredible avenue to announce that Jesus is Lord to the others. So, there's things going on with young people. There's new initiatives going on in church planting, though there's still a lot more thinking that's got to go into that. Creative is called. Wonderful things going on as culture and art is becoming an integral part of mission. Here's maybe a last thing, and then we'll move to a couple of other. Obviously, you read from my comments and from the numbers that the 19 dioceses of the Roman Catholic Church in Quebec are under an incredible weight of change. But all of the quantitative research that's being done indicates that there is an enormous, what we call in French, rapprochement. There is a coming together in terms of beliefs of those of us that would have an evangelical faith, an evangelical practice, both in the Protestant sector and in the Catholic sector. And what's of interest to me is that people of an Orthodox Christian faith can do things together today that was unimaginable 40 or 50 years ago. And I'm really quite happy about ways that Christians who affirm that Jesus is Lord, regardless of their confessional affiliation, can now engage the culture in fresh ways. And I'm upbeat. Last comment, and we'll get to the question. Here's what I'm not upbeat about. You are reading, you're hearing about this thing called the Charter of Quebec Values. Before I critique and tell you why I think this is a horrible idea, I'm going to tell you why I think it's happening. Again, Quebecers are always late to the train, but they always go beyond the station. Okay, here's where it affects. You never forget, Quebec represents about 8 million people in Quebec. 80% are francophones, are native French speakers. In this great big sea called North America, which is perceived as being unilingually Anglophone. So then how do you defend the French language and the Quebec culture in this sea of Anglophone North America? So a lot of what goes into the survival of the culture is the defense of the French language. I have this talk that I like to give. I won't give it to you today, but I will give you the title. And it's entitled How René Lévesque Saved Canada. Bill 101 was probably the best thing that René Lévesque ever did for Canada. Because what René Lévesque did was that he enshrined the French language so that it is the public language and the language of all public life in Quebec. And Quebecers then said, we get the best of both worlds. We get to protect our language and our culture, and we can stay in Canada. And so it was really how René Lévesque saved Canada breaking up. Now, there are other people in the PQ that want to go even farther than that. And in my opinion, separatism is dead. I don't think I'll ever participate in another referendum. I just don't see it on the horizon. But there are always people in the Parti Québécois who want to go farther. So they want to make regulations on the French language tougher. That one fails. They always talk about having another referendum. That's not going to happen. That's a non-starter. But there's always in the background, how do you integrate immigrants into Quebec? Protecting the language and protecting the culture. Now, the Supreme Court has stipulated on this, and the Supreme Court has used this expression called reasonable accommodation. There will be competing legal rights amongst people of different religions. And that's a hot button, not just in Quebec. You know that it's a hot button in British Columbia. You know it's a hot button right across the rest of Canada. But in the climate of Quebec, that's where the charter comes from. How do we integrate immigrants of different religions into public culture in Quebec. So that's what gave birth to the charter. That's what's behind it. Now, what's the bad part? Here comes my critique. Is that this is the most all-encompassing, oppressive. Now remember, it's not a law. It's a charter. Charters take precedence over laws. And so this is a charter to enshrine certain facts into Quebec public life. The most obvious part of it is that there will be no wearing of ostentatious religious symbols in public life in Quebec. Now, most Canadians would say it's probably not a good idea for a judge, a policeman, or a person in a prison guard, to have religious symbols showing when they're exercising coercive authority in their functions. Although the Supreme Court has said that Sikhs in the RCMP can wear their turbans. That was a reasonable accommodation. But this charter goes far beyond this. This charter will not allow a Muslim woman who works in a child care center to wear her hijab. This charter would not permit me, as a professor at McGill University or at Laval University, to wear a cross when I'm teaching. This charter would not allow a Jewish doctor at the Jewish General Hospital to wear his kippah when he's operating. This is the most far-reaching extension of laïcité, as we call it in French. The way you translate that in English is with the word secularism, which is not a good translation, but it's not really important. This thing is so far-reaching that it goes to the heart of Article 3 and Article 10 on the Quebec Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Article 1 and Article 15 of the Canadian Charter. And now there's lots of other stuff that goes into this thing, but that's what's driving this whole question. To which then I say, no government is ever going to tell me that when I'm in the classroom, I can't wear a cross. So that's why I now wear a Huguenot cross. But now the regulation hasn't come out on this thing yet, so maybe my cross is just too small to be investigated by some bureaucrat. But I can't imagine a bureaucrat showing up in one of my classrooms to measure my cross. So anyway, the government kind of backtracked because they thought, well, that's kind of stupid. You can't really ask people in theology not to wear their ostentatious religious symbols. So then they amended the charter so that those of us that teach theology, we can wear our ostentatious religious symbols. But that makes it even worse, because then my Jewish colleagues who teach in sociology, they have to take off their coat. This thing is crazy. But that's where we're at. This thing is so divisive. But that is the climate in which we're pursuing the mission. And in spite of that, I'm really upbeat. I think this is a wonderful day for mission. Now, what does that mean in the rest of the campaign? I think it means a couple of things. I can't think of anything better for Christians right across this country than to pray diligently for churches all over the province. One of my favorite theologians wrote this. He said, to clasp one's hands in prayer is the first act against the chaos in this world. There's lots of chaos in my culture. And so standing with your sisters and brothers, either in your denomination or standing with your sisters and brothers all across Quebec up there, it's maybe one of the boldest things that you can do. I think that another great thing is cross-cultural exchanges and even sending students. I mean, I actually marvel at the number of Canadians who are involved in French language immersion. That might be the next new missionary force to come to Quebec. I mean, think about it. other Canadian governments are willing to pay people to learn and master French, and then God by His Spirit will send them to Quebec to help with missions, I think that's a great idea. Yeah? It doesn't cost us a red penny. I just think that's a wonderful idea. And so, encouraging young people to master French and then come to university and do ministry, I can't think of anything bigger than that. And then I think that another huge thing, I'm going to talk a little bit about this tonight, but I think one of the greatest needs in Quebec today is ministry with universities. The numbers on this are stunning. Just for the city of Montreal, just in the census metropolitan area of Montreal, 3.8, 3.9 million people. There are 6 major universities, 15 CEGEPs, which are kind of our junior colleges, compulsory. And then another 40 professional and technical schools. There are 250,000 university students in Montreal alone, not just in Montreal, 250,000. For those 250,000 students, university, GBU, Howard and Change, university chaplains, or churches that have a dedicated minister or pastor or worker working with university, post-secondary school students. There are 12 full-time equivalents. 250,000, my daughter and I were working on this today. 250,000 people, that makes it the size of Saskatoon. Are there 12 pastors in Saskatoon? Lots more, exactly. Can you name a city in Canada of 250,000 people that's only got 12 people working full-time in ministry? You want to talk about an unreached people group? Let's talk about post-secondary school universities. This to me is the title of Missions Fest, hidden from plain sight. There it is, right there. And so I think that encouraging your students to come and do their university education in Quebec is a really good idea. But I'll tell you another good idea why it's a really good idea. Tell them to come to Quebec, get into McGill, get into Université Montréal. Tell them, don't start right away. Take 6 months and just master the culture. Become a resident in Quebec. Then you get to pay Quebec tuition fees. Okay? It's a real bargain. Okay? I can be very utilitarian as a missiologist, but it really works. And so I think we're in a good day. Well, listen, let me pause there. We've got plenty of time for questions. I kind of tried to give you the scope of the thing, and I'm sure I might have said some things that rankled a few feathers, no problem. But maybe some questions, maybe you want to get into some of the more the data. But let's go. Question. Yeah, we got a microphone here.
My name is Phil Morgan, and I can't speak, I know a little bit of French, but I'm from Bellingham, Washington, and I look at what you're saying, and I say, why? Why? Even from your talk, why? And the other question is this going to happen to other provinces or states? My big question is why?
Yeah, okay, excellent, great question. I often say to denominational people, to other people in para-ecclesiastical ministries like me, that if you want to know where culture's going in North America, come to Quebec. This is where the shift is going to take. I think that there are some very dramatic social changes going on in culture. Certainly the hyper-individuality, the rise of the autonomous self, all of these are huge issues going on in culture. And I think the why, in part, is related to this huge reaction to institutional Christian belief that really clicked in the 1960s. So you've got that. That's one of the whys. I think a second thing then is the rise of cultural forces like hyper-individualism, hyper-consumerism, hypersexualization. So you've got two forces working culturally at the same time, at cross purposes, but creating the same effects. And so I think that's part of what's going on. Now, I think there's another thing that's unique to Quebec that this won't affect the rest of Canada, or the United States. But I think it's very true. We know, for example, in secularization, in cultures that used to be homogeneously Roman Catholic, Quebec, Ireland, Poland, Spain. Italy is a little bit exempt because of the Vatican. But in cultures that were homogeneously Roman Catholic, that when these forces begin to take place, hope becomes political. Again, remember Chesterton. People stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing. They believe in anything. Anything becomes political. And so that's why you see then the rise. So the state became the providential state. That's actually the expression we use in French, l'État provident. That now, after 50 years, it's just not sustainable. So that's why you've got this shift. But I think that's the why.
Just speak it out loud. I'd just like to hear your observation, the excellent speech on the impact.
Oh, you're recording. That's right.
I'd just like to hear your observations on the impact, if any, of the immigrants, the French-speaking immigrants, I think particularly Africans, and the impact they would have in Quebec, as far as related to whether it's in institutions coming as students or coming as immigrants, whether Catholic or Protestant.
Okay, no, great question. A couple of things. Let me talk just from a mission point of view. We know right now that there are over 100 Spanish-speaking churches in the census metropolitan area of Montreal. There are better than 200 Haitian churches, Protestant, in Montreal. There are 35 Congolese churches in Montreal, not African, Congolese. And so these become great mission forces. Are they integrating and doing effective outreach to Quebecers? Not yet. Okay, but the story is not over yet. So I think that there's a new mission for us. But that's part of the story all over the Western world. And so I think that so that's going on. But that's going on in your city as well. Okay? So I think, but what's different is because of our immigration rules in Quebec and because of the agreements between Ottawa and Quebec City. Quebec controls its own immigration. Obviously, we prioritize immigrants coming from French-speaking countries. And so, therefore, that's what's holding up our population. Okay, that from a missiological point of view, that's the good news. Here's the bad news. Not from a missiological point of view, but from the state point of view. You recruit a lot of French-speaking North Africans, and they are Muslim. So you end up, want to know why we got a charter? Okay, in social sciences, we always ask the question, what is the problem to which this is the solution? Okay, the charter, what is the problem to which the charter is the solution? The answer is, it's Islam. So that's what the government's reacting to, the Muslim. Now that's where then Christian Direction and the Protestant Partnership that I chair, when we put in our brief to the Parliamentary Commission on the Charter, the point we try to make is that we as Protestants are not a people of ostentatious religious symbols. I look at you, I just look at you and I say, I know you're Protestant. Most of you don't have a cross on. It's not who Protestants are. So this charter is not going to have a whole lot of effect on Protestants. But it's not just a question of for us. It's justice for all. So that's why I'm encouraging Protestants to stand with Jews, to stand with Sikhs, to stand with Muslims. The government can't have it both ways. You can't say we're only going to have French-speaking immigrants, but not let them have their world and life view. That's what's going on.
I think I read in this past week or two that Pauline Marois, yes, that in part this charter was a strategy to get a majority government, because a lot of people who would support the charter are in the rural areas, and so it's anyway, a little bit of a strategy.
Yeah. Okay. Oh no. With the Parti Québécois, there's always strategy. With the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada, there's always strategy. It's not like all of a sudden there's something different going on. Oh no, there's definite strategy going on. And what she's been able to do is able to put two groups of people together who normally wouldn't talk. People who live in rural Quebec who have tended to hold on to their Roman Catholic heritage, so they're afraid of immigrants, and then more liberal, atheistic types who want to get rid of all religion. And so she's been able to put those two groups together, and she's pretty close to 50%. What she will do is she will do it on the back of Montreal. And here's my other political read. Pauline Marois and Stephen Harper are good friends. Stephen Harper has shown us for the first time in the history of the Confederation that you can have a majority government in Canada without Quebec. He's proven that, okay? Pauline Marois is going to do the same thing. She's going to try and get a majority government in Quebec without Montreal. Now that would be a disaster, in my opinion. But that's what she's going to try and do. Because Montreal is dramatic in the polls against this charter. Because we live with the diversity every day. Now, if you go to Chicoutimi, well, where's the diversity? So there's strategy to it. You can see where this could go. I'll try and be a prophet here for just a second. This might pass, I'm not sure, but if it passes, within minutes of it going through the National Assembly, there's a whole slew of people that are going to take this to the courts. Okay? It will be turned down at the appellate court. It'll be turned down at the Quebec Superior Court. The Supreme Court might not even hear it, because the Supreme Court is going to say, wait a minute, we've got jurisprudence on reasonable accommodation. We don't need to hear this again. So the Parti Québécois will throw themselves all over the floor. Here we are persecuted. Here's another reason why we need to leave Canada. Okay, so that's where the story is. Am I cynical? Yes. Okay, another question.
Okay. It's so rich, all the things you're talking about, and I will do two comments. It's like two questions, you know what? And you can elaborate. The first thing I will start by the last one. I lost it. Well, start for the first one, I forgot the second one. About, there is a reality, and I think they might use that for the charts and everything. But the reality that there is more Muslim coming to Quebec, but it's not also only Quebec. There is a reality that is also all over the world. You know, with I forgot the word, but it's the jihad, where they do the war, but there's also the population. They say they want to be, soon they would populate the world, they'll be the majority, take over. They do the same in England, they do the same in Germany, they do the same in France. There was some a poll that was saying that in 2030, there would be about 70% of Muslims in France. There is, I make a comment and you can maybe elaborate. I'm just saying there is a reality that because the integrism of the Muslim, which is not a good thing either in our world, you know, for what they impose. They come to Canada and to all those new nations, you know, to all those immigrant nations, and come and impose use the system and use the law in Canada, will open also with the Charter of Rights, which is so one of the best in the world, and other nations also, and come and use it against us by imposing their rules. And I'm not saying that I'm aware that they now they maybe use it, but there is a reality in Quebec that was brought, when a boy bring a knife at school, and he has the right because it is his religion, other kids can. In some part of Quebec, there was an immigrant part of Quebec where they would impose the veil to teachers, because 70% of the class were Muslim. See, those are also abused, and the reality that people don't think about, and they don't hear about enough here. They want to see also Quebec being, I found, in this...
Okay, let me jump in. Okay, I follow where you're going. Okay. Yes, but. Okay? There always are inappropriate, what I'll call unreasonable accommodations that take place. Partly because native Quebecers, and I would say this even about white Canadian folk like me, because we don't know who we are, we tend to accommodate others in inappropriate ways. So, but the media has exaggerated these things far beyond words. And that came out when the Bouchard-Taylor report came out on reasonable accommodation. They documented every one of these, and in every case, they showed where the media had exaggerated, but it wasn't the facts. Okay. I think from a missional point of view, from a Christian point of view, before we're too hard on the Muslims on this one, maybe we ought to become more self-critical of how we've allowed economic materialism to infiltrate us. And maybe we've swallowed the baby in the bathwater as well. So before we're too critical on Muslims, maybe I think, hey, there's other religious forces, other worldview forces that are affecting the church, and maybe we've been too accommodating to economic materialism as a world. But I think that's where we need reasonable accommodation. There's competing forces. Okay, another question. Hang on, we'll come back to it. Okay, one question at a time. I gotta be fair. I gotta be just for all.
I'm wondering if Pope Francis has had any positive impact on Quebecers being re-involved in their Catholic faith or church attendance.
It's a great question. Too early to say, although I'm really intrigued by how positive French-speaking Quebecers are reacting. So it's too early to say. You know what? We're only 11 months in. To be followed. Okay. Question over here. Well, go ahead. Let's do a question here, and we'll get back to you.
With the exceptionally low birth rate in Quebec, I wondered if you wanted to comment on that in terms of the church and the future of spirituality and religion.
Well, there's why you have to have immigration. So, since 1971, birth rates in Quebec, so sociologically speaking, birth rates measure the number of children per female 15 to 40. Okay? So it's a synthetic number. To replace a population, you need 2.2 children per female 15 to 40. Okay? So my wife and I, we made our contribution. We had 2 plus 2 plus another third. She just happens to be sitting in the room right now, too. The rate in Quebec has been below 2.2 since 1971. So for 40 years, we've been in a perpetual state of not being able to replace the next generation. The pressure economically then becomes huge, which is then why you need immigration. And so that's the issue. Okay? What does this mean for the church? Well, far be it from me to tell women to have babies. I think as my wife has said here, because Quebec does all sorts of things to promote birth. That's why we've got $7 a day daycare. mothers can send their children to publicly funded daycare for $7 a day. It's been the most significant part of reducing poverty in the last 10 years in Quebec. But it hasn't increased the birth rate, because my wife would say, you can't pay women enough to have babies that share their rooms if the social conditions of life don't improve. You can't buy babies. And so I think that's why Christians need to work really hard at contributing to the common good, so that therefore they can be fruitful, multiply. We're back to creation. I'm happy to keep going, but I got the sign that life's over. But let's just do the rest of the questions. If you want to keep going, I'm happy to keep going. I don't have to speak again until 7 o'clock.
Has the Roman Catholic Church done anything differently to react to this situation?
Wonderful question. Yes and no. One of the most complicated parts of this charter is how discriminating it is. Back in 1937, 36 or 37, the Premier, Duplessis, gave a crucifix to the National Assembly and put it in the National Assembly. So, like in your Parliament in Victoria, can you imagine if there was a cross with Jesus on a cross in the House? I mean, you wouldn't put up with it. He did it. The Roman Catholic Church is not being near vocal enough about it coming down. But on the other hand, Roman Catholic parishes are doing a wonderful job on faith education for children. They've learned that they haven't done it for 300 years, so it's time. So I think there's good things and there's not so good. Okay, I'm getting the guillotine sign. So have a good afternoon. May God be with you.